Tommy Robinson versus Keir Starmer, the reckoning begins. On May 16, 2026, Tommy Robinson marshaled an estimated 50,000 protesters through central London in what organizers called a Unite the Kingdom March. The demonstration, ostensibly about two-tier policing and immigration policy, came amid escalating tensions over asylum seeker accommodation across Britain. But framing this as simply another far-right rally misses the deeper rot. Successive UK governments have systematically engineered this crisis through opacity, last-minute decisions, and a catastrophic asylum backlog now exceeding 18 months average processing time. The Watton situation epitomizes the dysfunction. In March 2026, Norfolk residents woke to discover the Clock Tower Hotel would house approximately 200 asylum seekers, announced with minimal advance notice, no community consultation, and local council members claiming they learned about it from journalists. This pattern repeats nationwide. Home Office procurement documents reviewed by independent researchers show a deliberate strategy. Approach hotel operators 48-72 hours before occupancy. Bypass planning permissions by citing emergency powers under the Nationality and Borders Act 2022, and present local authorities with fait accompli arrangements. The goal is transparent: minimize organized opposition by compressing reaction time. Let's address the claims driving public anger with actual data. Robinson and allied voices cite rising sexual assault rates in areas with asylum hotels. Home Office figures from 2025 show 127 reported sexual offenses involving asylum seekers across all accommodation sites nationally, out of approximately 51,000 individuals in the system. That's a rate of 0.25%. For context, the general UK population offence rate for sexual crimes is approximately 0.18% annually. The difference exists but is statistically marginal, and crucially, most offenses were committed against other asylum seekers within the accommodation itself. The rapes by illegals narrative collapses under scrutiny. These are predominantly desperate people trapped in limbo, not a criminal invasion force. Yet dismissing all concerns as racist hysteria ignores legitimate grievances. Communities like Watton, population 10,000, absorbing 200 newcomers overnight, face real strain on GP surgeries, school places, and social services. Not because asylum seekers are inherently burdensome, but because central government provides inadequate funding to local authorities for integration support. A 2025 National Audit Office report found the Home Office allocated just £750 per asylum seeker annually to local councils, while actual integration costs averaged £2,100. Councils either absorbed the shortfall or cut services. Residents notice the squeeze, blame the visible newcomers, and the cycle intensifies. The asylum backlog itself represents governmental malpractice bordering on sabotage. In 2010, the average asylum claim took 6 months to process. By 2024, it had ballooned to 18 months, with some claimants waiting over 3 years for initial decisions. During this limbo, asylum seekers cannot legally work, cannot move freely, cannot integrate. They're warehoused in hotels at £150, £200 per night, costing taxpayers approximately £8 million daily nationwide, while the Rwanda deportation scheme consumed £290 million before processing a single person. The Conservative government under Rishi Sunak pursued performative cruelty over functional administration. The current Labour government under Keir Starmer inherited this disaster and has so far offered little beyond rhetorical repositioning. Now let's confront the elephant in the room. Why are people being arrested for social media posts, and why does this fuel such rage? Since 2023, approximately 3,400 individuals have been arrested in the UK for online speech offences under the Communications Act 2003, with about 870 receiving custodial sentences. The law itself, Section 127, makes it an offence to send messages that are grossly offensive or of an indecent, obscene, or menacing character. The vagueness is deliberate and dangerous. What constitutes grossly offensive depends entirely on subjective interpretation by police, prosecutors, and magistrates. The cases reveal a troubling pattern. In 2024, a 55-year-old woman in West Yorkshire received a 6-month sentence for posting on Facebook that a local mosque should be demolished and the lot of them sent back. No specific threat, no incitement to immediate violence, just ugly opinion expressed crudely. In Liverpool, a man got 8 weeks for calling for a mosque to be burned down, which crossed into threat territory but received a harsher sentence than many actual physical assaults. In contrast, when counter-protesters have posted equally inflammatory content about white racists or called for violence against Robinson's supporters, prosecutions have been notably rarer. This disparity, whether real or perceived, feeds the two-tier policing narrative that drives thousands into the streets. Here's the psychological mechanism at work. When ordinary people, not activists or extremists, but everyday citizens venting frustration online, face criminal consequences for speech while witnessing what they perceive as tolerance for opposing views, it creates a sense of systemic betrayal. They see grooming gang scandals in Rotherham, Rochdale, and Telford, where police admitted avoiding investigation for fear of appearing racist. They see pro-Palestine protests where some participants chant from the river to the sea without arrest, while someone posting anti-immigration sentiments faces a dawn raid. The factual accuracy of these perceptions matters less than their emotional power. Perceived injustice radicalizes faster than actual injustice because it's unfalsifiable. Enter Elon Musk, who on May 15 tweeted, "Freedom of speech is dead in the UK. People jailed for social media posts while the government imports voters." Musk's intervention stems partly from his recent falling out with Nigel Farage over Reform UK's direction, but mainly from his increasingly messianic view of himself as free speech's global guardian. His platform amplification of Robinson's march and asylum skepticism carries dangers beyond his obvious ideological motivations. X, formerly Twitter, algorithms demonstrably favor engagement-maximizing content, which means inflammatory, emotionally charged posts about immigration outperform nuanced policy analysis by 10-to-1 margins. When the world's richest man, controlling a major communications platform, weighs in on a foreign nation's domestic politics, he doesn't just participate in debate, he warps it. But let's dig deeper into the social fabric itself, because this isn't ultimately about policy. It's about fear, identity, and the failure of multiculturalism as practiced versus as preached. The British experiment with diverse communities living side by side has produced both remarkable successes and catastrophic failures. In cities like Leicester, Birmingham, and parts of London, you find genuinely integrated neighborhoods where corner shops are run by second-generation Bangladeshi families, where Diwali and Eid are celebrated alongside Christmas, where kids of all backgrounds attend the same schools and form friendships that transcend their parents' prejudices. These success stories exist and matter, yet they coexist with parallel failures. Neighborhoods in Bradford, Oldham, and parts of East London, where ethnic and religious segregation has intensified over decades. A 2024 study by the Social Integration Commission found that in 23% of British electoral wards, more than 50% of residents share the same non-British ethnic heritage. And crucially, these areas show declining cross-cultural contact over time, rather than increasing integration. White British families move out as Asian or African populations move in, not necessarily from racism, but from the entirely human desire to live among people who share cultural reference points. The result is self-reinforcing segregation. Schools provide the starkest evidence. In Birmingham, 76 primary schools have student populations that are over 90% from a single ethnic minority background. In Bradford, the figure is 58 schools. These children grow up with almost no meaningful interaction with kids from other backgrounds. They're not learning to navigate difference, to find common ground, to see shared humanity across surface distinctions. Instead, they're being educated in de facto monocultural environments that happen to exist within a nominally multicultural society. When these kids reach adulthood, is it any surprise that mutual suspicion and misunderstanding persist? Religion compounds the challenge exponentially. Britain has managed Christian-Jewish coexistence reasonably well, partly because both religions underwent secularization and reformation that subordinated religious law to civil law. Islam, particularly in its conservative Salafi and Deobandi interpretations prevalent in many British mosques, has not undergone equivalent reformation. This creates genuine friction points. halal slaughter practices that conflict with animal welfare advocacy, faith school curricula that teach homosexuality as sinful in contradiction to Equality Act principles, gender segregation practices that clash with feminist values, and blasphemy concepts that collide head-on with free speech norms. These are not imaginary conflicts invented by bigots. They are real, substantive disagreements about fundamental values. When a Birmingham primary school faced protests in 2019 over LGBT-inclusive relationship education, with predominantly Muslim parents withdrawing children en masse, both sides had legitimate positions rooted in deeply held beliefs. Progressive activists saw homophobia that must be challenged. Muslim parents saw their religious values being undermined by state education. No amount of diversity training resolves that collision of incompatible worldviews. The grooming gang scandals represent the most catastrophic failure of integration and policing combined. Between 1997 and 2013, approximately 1,400 children in Rotherham were sexually exploited by predominantly British Pakistani gangs. Similar patterns emerged in Rochdale, Oxford, Telford, and other towns. The 2014 J report found that police and social services repeatedly failed to act on reports because they feared being labeled racist. Workers who raised concerns were silenced or dismissed. Victims, predominantly white working-class girls, were characterized as consenting participants rather than abuse victims. This failure has poisoned community relations perhaps irreversibly in affected areas. When white working-class families watch their daughters abused for years while authorities do nothing, then see those same authorities prosecute them for angry Facebook posts, the social contract shatters. The far right didn't create this grievance. They exploited it, certainly. But the grievance itself is legitimate and rooted in documented institutional failure driven by misapplied anti-racism. You cannot lecture working-class communities about tolerance and integration while simultaneously demonstrating that their children's safety matters less than avoiding uncomfortable conversations about culture and religion. So how do we move forward? First, we must abandon the fiction that all cultures are equally compatible with liberal democratic values. They aren't. Some cultural practices, including those from white British culture's own past, are incompatible with modern human rights frameworks and must be opposed, not celebrated, as diversity. Forced marriage is abuse, not culture. Female genital mutilation is mutilation, not tradition. Honor violence is violence, not custom. Integration cannot mean accepting everything. It means establishing non-negotiable principles while allowing maximum freedom within those boundaries. Second, we need honest conversation about segregation and its consequences. The current approach, where pointing out that Bradford has neighborhoods with almost zero white British residents gets you labeled racist, guarantees the conversation happens only in far-right spaces. Segregation harms everyone. It prevents the daily interactions that break down stereotypes. It allows misinformation and fear to flourish unchallenged. Governments should actively incentivize mixed communities through housing policy, school catchment areas, and community funding that rewards integration. Third, religious freedom must have limits when it conflicts with other fundamental rights. Faith schools that teach homosexuality as immoral should lose state funding. Mosques that promote gender segregation or Islamist ideology should face the same scrutiny as churches that promoted racism in the past. This isn't anti-Muslim bias, it's applying liberal principles consistently. Muslim reformers and progressives exist and should be amplified rather than marginalized by misguided leftist alliance with conservative religious voices. Fourth, police and prosecution services need clear guidelines on speech offenses that protect both free expression and vulnerable communities. The current system, where grossly offensive means whatever a magistrate thinks it means, breeds arbitrary enforcement and justified resentment. A better standard: speech should be criminal only when it constitutes a direct, specific threat or incitement to imminent violence. "I hate Muslims" is offensive but protected. "Let's burn down the mosque on Friday" is a conspiracy to commit arson and rightfully prosecuted. Everything in between requires more speech in response, not state punishment. Fifth, and most crucially, we must recognize that a tiny minority on both sides drives the majority of tension. Most British Muslims are not Islamists. most white Britons are not far-right extremists. The overwhelming majority want the same things: safe neighborhoods, good schools for their kids, economic opportunity, and to be left alone to live their lives. But social media algorithms, activist organizations on both sides, and opportunistic politicians benefit from amplifying division. Tommy Robinson has built a career and income stream from perpetual crisis. Islamist preachers maintain influence by portraying Muslims as under siege. Both need the conflict to continue. The solution isn't complicated in theory. Rapid asylum processing, work rights for claimants, proportional distribution with adequate funding, consistent policing of actual crimes regardless of perpetrator background, honest acknowledgement of integration failures, active policies to promote mixing rather than segregation, and rejection of both racist extremism and cultural relativism that excuses harmful practices. In practice, it requires political courage that neither major party has demonstrated. Labour fears losing working-class voters. Conservatives fear their right wing being outflanked by Reform UK. So dysfunction persists, Robinson's movement grows, and Elon Musk treats British social cohesion as his personal plaything.